Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. In this interview, I had the opportunity to talk with Keith Giles and Cody Cook on the topic of hell. I thought it would be a really good discussion to have in our season on propaganda because I don't think there's any aspect of Christian belief that seems more propagandistic than the notion of hell, especially the notion that a lot of modern Protestant Western Christians have, which is this concept of hell as a place of eternal conscious torment. We've discussed throughout the season how fear is often a very big motivator of propaganda and a very big tool of propaganda. And so it doesn't seem like there's anything that would instill more fear than being tortured for all of eternity. At the same time, if a hell of eternal conscious torment is real, or even a hell where one is punished for some finite period of time and then annihilated, if that is true, then is it really propaganda to kind of purport this belief that one thinks is true? It was great to be able to talk with both Keith and Cody in this episode because they come from different ends of the spectrum in terms of conservative, more orthodox, and somebody like Keith who it would be more to the left of the spectrum. That hopefully has allowed us to avoid caricaturing different beliefs because we had kind of representatives from each area, and hopefully that gives us a very well-rounded discussion here. I think maybe more than most of the other episodes that I've done and the interviews that I've done, it felt like this was more of a dialogue, a continuing dialogue, rather than coming down on some hard and fast conclusions, because there's just a lot of murkiness to the idea of propaganda and truth and how one puts forth their beliefs in discussions. Do the intentions of somebody matter in regard to the information that they're talking about? Does the truthfulness of something matter? If something is untrue, does that automatically make it propaganda, or are intentions and motivations a part of what makes something propagandistic? I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion, and hopefully you do as well. I'm putting timestamps in the show notes so that you can jump around or go back to different sections that you find most beneficial. And I'm also going to put links in the show notes to Cody and Keith's resources, their various books and websites and such. All right, without further ado, here it is, the interview with Keith Giles and Cody Cook. All right, so I asked you guys to have a discussion tonight because over the last year or so, I've really been thinking through propaganda, and one of the things that I've done throughout the season is to look at how the church has inappropriately motivated people or used propaganda throughout history, ways that we've kind of been false prophets and not true to the calling of Christ. Yeah. And one of the things that obviously comes up when people talk about the church is going to be this idea of hell, especially a lot of the modern conservative evangelical views of hell, where you're going to go to this fiery place of eternal torment. It seems like it's fear mongering, and it's something that's pushing people to make a decision out of inordinate fear. So I want to kind of talk about that tonight. And before I do, though, I'd love for you to introduce yourselves, and then we can kind of jump in.
You go first.
Yeah.
Oh, am I going first? Okay. So my name is Keith Giles. I'm an author. I just finished writing a 7-part series called the Jesus series. So I wrote, one of the books I wrote in this series was Jesus Undefeated, and it's specifically dealing with this topic about the sort of historically 3 different views of hell. And so, yeah, that's kind of the main reason I think I was invited to this conversation. I also host a couple of podcasts, Heretic Happy Hour, Apostates Anonymous, Second Cup with Keith. And I'm the co-owner of Quiet Publishing. So that just happened recently. So yeah.
I was going to ask you about that because I saw that you were listed as a co-owner. I didn't think that you were originally.
No, that just happened in January. Yeah, Matthew
Okay.
DiStefano and myself are now the co-owners of Choir, and it's a brand new company. Technically, I mean, we incorporated it under the name Choir, but it's under an LLC, and been putting out some really great stuff. We're super excited about new things we're doing in the future.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of a new thing.
And Choir kind of publishes sort of theologically progressive-ish books. Was that an accurate description of
Yeah.
it?
So, and that's going to shift a little bit. So yes, Choir has always been publishing Christian books by Christians on theology, on deconstruction, reconstruction themes. Typically the kinds of books most Christian publishers won't publish because it's going to ask certain questions that they're not comfortable asking. So that's going to continue, but we're broadening out now. So we're actually publishing some post-Christian authors as well. And we just launched our Choir Classics series where we're actually reprinting out of print or public domain books. Like we're publishing Brothers Karamazov with a new foreword by Brian Zahn, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran with a foreword by Paul Young. I wrote a foreword to The Kingdom of God is Within You by Tolstoy. So, we're doing stuff like that. And just to kind of bring what we feel like are some really great books that a lot of Christians probably have intended to read, but haven't gotten around to.
Yeah.
To reintroduce those books with forwards by people they do recognize, hoping to entice them. Like David Bentley Hart wrote one for Alice in Wonderland. It's a great forward. And anyway, so stuff like that.
Well,
And thanks for a chance to let me pitch, talk about my publishing company a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah. Cody?
Yeah, so I've been on before. So if somebody wants a little more information on me, they can always go back and listen to that one. But I guess I'm here as, my viewpoint is what you call conditionalism or annihilationism. So I don't believe in eternal conscious torment either. But I think I'm a bit to the right of Keith, where I think Keith is kind of more into that sort of deconstruction, reconstruction mode. I'm somebody who I think I like semper reformanda better. The idea that we're sort of trying to stay within kind of the Orthodox tradition, but also asking questions about what's been useful, what's been helpful, what's been biblical, what's not been biblical. And so I'm happy to maybe defend my people who believe in eternal conscious torment to some extent. It's not my position, and I'll argue with their the correctness of their views and whether it's biblical. But I also am going to be somebody who I think is, I don't know exactly where Keith's going to argue, but I have a feeling he's at least going to be a little to the left of me on this question of whether the idea of hell or eternal conscious torment counts as propaganda or not. So maybe we'll get into that and find out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great start because I think it kind of puts you both on display here. Cody, one of your books talks a little bit about biblical inerrancy and that sort of thing, right? Yeah. So I think you'd definitely be to the right, and Keith would be to the left.
That's the book I'm thinking of. I'm in that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keith was a general. So I was arguing with people who I saw sort of having wanting to sort of unhitch the Old Testament from Jesus. And so Keith is one of the perspectives that I engage with, and he was kind enough to grant me an interview so I could kind of make sure that I was representing him correctly. I couldn't get a hold of some of the other folks, Greg Boyd and Andy Stanley. So if I misrepresented them, that's their fault because they wouldn't grant me an interview. But Keith was willing to do that for me, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're really trying to be accurate and not misrepresent people today. So we've got everybody across the spectrum, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and jump right in. And I think what would be helpful is to kind of start with just a history and background of the idea of hell, so we can kind of have a picture of the landscape. For me, growing up, eternal conscious torment, it was a surprise to me when I started reading some of the early church fathers and going back a bit. And I remember the first one was when I was reading Nissa's On the Soul and the Resurrection. And I came across this passage and I was like, man, he sounds like he's a universalist, but he can't be, because he was a Christian, and he was a founding father. So he couldn't believe that. And it of course, I went and did some of the legwork, and it's hard to pin people down to positions that, we've sort of defined more in modernity. but
Mhm.
it really does seem like he was a universalist, and that kind of shook me a bit. That it seemed to be diversity in the early church in regard to a position on hell. So I don't know if either of you would speak. We can start with Keith, since he is
Yeah.
the elder here and the most experienced. So we'll just start with Keith.
Yeah.
Tell us a little
So-
bit about the early church view on hell.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's a great way to start, Derek. I agree. So I kind of had a similar thing too. I was raised my whole life to believe in eternal conscious torment, believed it, taught it, preached it as an ordained minister. And until, I kind of came across a few things like you did. The first one was a friend of mine. He has a radio program. His name is Steve Gregg. And someone had called into his, it's like a Bible question program. And it asked a question about one of the verses that seems to be about eternal torment. And then he gave this response, which blew my mind. And when I went and kind of chased it down, and I realized that this was the truth, like this was right, as it was based on history, it totally blew my mind and changed my perspective. It set me on the course of investigating the historic Christian view of hell. And the realization was that there is no one historic Christian view of hell. There are three, and almost from the very beginning there have been three. And so one of the, I think the reference that I got from him was he mentioned there's a reference in it's called the what is it called? I think it's the Herzog, the New Schaff Herzog Christian Encyclopedia, which says, this is a quote: "In the first 5 or 6 centuries of Christianity, there were 6 known theological schools, of which 4 of them in Alexandria, Antioch, Caesarea, Edessa, those were universalist schools. One of them in Ephesus was conditional immortality, and one of them in Rome taught endless punishment." And so that was a shock, like, whoa, is that real? Like, yeah. So not only were there 3 views, 4 out of the 6 schools taught universalism. And then when you dig into that, well, who were these people? Like Gregory of Nyssa, Gregory of Nazianzus, Athanasius. There are a lot of these church fathers who sat on some of the famous councils, like the Council of Nicaea, who, these are, like you said, church fathers who helped to help us understand the doctrine of the Trinity. And they were universalists. And so they weren't heretics. They were Christians. What I also thought was fascinating, though, was it seems that there was a lot of like this topic of, what's your view on eternal conscious torment doesn't seem to have been a deal breaker for them. Because again, like on some of these councils, they were all Christians. They were all peers. They all respected one another for the most part. And they weren't upset with the fact that I'm on a council with, I believe in annihilation, and this other guy, who's leading the council is a universalist, and maybe the guy next to me believes in eternal conscious torment, and that was fine. You know what I mean? That wasn't a deal breaker for them, which I think is really the other way we know that they coexisted was the earliest creeds, like the Apostles' Creed and others, do not contain any references to eternal conscious torment or anything like at all about one way or the other, annihilation or universalism. And I think it's because they recognized that they as Christians didn't all agree on that. So because those creeds were meant to say, well, here's what we do agree on, right? And so they put the things they did agree on, but they left out any views on hell. And I think it's because they recognized, yeah, we don't all agree on this, but they didn't seem that upset about it, at least early on. And so I don't know if Cody agrees with that or not, but I mean, that's the history and the research that I've done, and other sources that are kind of saying that, yeah, a whole lot of early church fathers were universalists. I think another bit of evidence in the negative, or from the other side, is like Augustine. And when Augustine comes to write about his view of hell, which was eternal conscious torment, begins by saying, he says that indeed very many do not agree with me. They take the other view, the universalist view, and in a moment of incredible grace and clarity, Augustine said that those Christians who disagree with him and those Christians who instead embraced universalism did so, he said, quote, without doing violence to the scriptures. So he recognized that both from his perspective and from the universalist perspective, and also from the annihilationist perspective, whichever of those 3 views Christians took, all 3 of those views were Christian views, and they were all based on the same Bible, based on the same scriptures. It was just a difference of how they approached those scriptures and how they understood what they were reading. So I think that's helpful for if listeners don't know that. And again, I'm just interested in it. We're talking about propaganda, as well. Propaganda is what I grew up with. Propaganda was being told, this is the only Christian view. It's eternal conscious torment. It's the Orthodox historical Christian view, and any other views are heresy. That is not only false, that's indoctrination. Education, true education, would be what I just did, to tell you that there were always three views. Here's what they were. And to say, then I could say, I prefer this one, but I would leave the listener the opportunity to make up their own mind about which of those three views they felt was more accurate. That to me is education. So indoctrination or propaganda would be only telling you one view and telling you that's the only correct view, and warning you with fear, you better not listen to those other people. Don't read those books. Don't go to those seminars. Don't watch that YouTube video. Don't read that book, because it's dangerous and it's heretical and it's demonic or whatever. And that's where the propaganda comes in, to kind of like keep people from having information that contradicts your information.
Yeah, certainly. Silencing voices is a huge tool that unfortunately works pretty well.
Yeah, it does.
Cody, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would push back a little bit on a few points. In my reading of the early church fathers, I'd say that they were either vague, so they statements that would either support eternal conscious torment or annihilation, but probably not universalism, or they were pro-eternal conscious torment, or less often they're explicitly annihilationist or universalist. Keith's right. Augustine mentions a sizable number of universalists in the church, but he does argue strongly against them. He does say that their opinion is not, they're not sort of arraying themselves against scripture, but he says that they're trying to soften everything that seems hard in scripture. So he's saying, they're not sort of saying I deny scripture, they're just sort of weakening it and reading it and misreading it, is kind of how he sees it. The creeds do mention Jesus coming to judge, which I do think sort of at least implies eternal conscious torment or annihilation. I know that that's a little bit more complicated when you have purgatory and things like that in the mix. But as far as fathers who were explicitly universalist, there is Gregory of Nyssa, who has a strong Orthodox pedigree. As Keith mentioned, he's somebody who was very influential for the creeds and the councils, early creeds and councils. Then there's of course Origen, who was, I think, deeply loved in the early church, but pretty much all the Orthodox thinkers seem to see him as a bit off. So like Jerome, for example, plagiarizes Origen left and right, but even he sort of goes, yeah, I love Origen, he's fantastic, but he's also kind of off. and so I do agree with Keith that there are these sort of three views represented early on. I'm just not maybe quite as optimistic about how much universalism is represented by sort of the main Orthodox thinkers.
Yeah, and I would just respond to the point Cody made about references to the judgment. I think that's maybe a misunderstanding of what is meant by universalism. Like, universalism doesn't mean everybody, go straight to heaven, don't pass the judgment seat, go straight into paradise. It's the opposite. Actually, patristic universalism, as most early Christians taught it, was that everyone passes through the fire. So no one escapes the flame. The flames are a metaphor, right? How God's a refining fire and a fuller's soap, and so we shouldn't be afraid of soap. Soap doesn't kill anybody or destroy anybody, and so that fire also is a metaphor for purification and refinement. So facing the judgment to a universalist would not be seen as, oh, well, if I have to face the judgment, that means I don't. Universalism can't be true. It would say, no, that statement proves actually we agree with that. Yes, everyone will go through this judgment, through this fire, through this process of transformation and refinement, regardless of who they are. And so I wouldn't see a reference in the early creeds to a judgment as any sort of like there's no reason to assume that means eternal torment if it's not going to say it means that, or even annihilation, because there's no no clue one way or the other in that simple statement of judgment of, well, what kind of judgment? What happens in the judgment? It just says there is a judgment.
A quick question, Keith, just to clarify. For that kind of purging view of universalism, do you see the purging as a kind of suffering? Is it painful in some way? Or would you sort of move away from that kind of understanding of it? Because I understand what you say about soap, but we also have fire, so
Yeah.
they kind of communicate different things.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. But I would urge everyone to see both of those as metaphors, right? I don't think we should take literally that there's a giant lake of suds in heaven that we'll all be thrown into and washed vigorously, any more than we should take a literal lake of flame and fire that we're all going to burn in somehow. Both of those are used as metaphors. And yes, I would concede that it seems that when those metaphors are used and fire is used or judgment is used, there is the implication of that it's uncomfortable, that it's not a good thing, that there is suffering involved in that process. But again, it's a suffering that's for our good. I mean, I would turn to Hebrews 12, which specifically says that God disciplines those he loves, and all of us are disciplined. So that means we're all the children of God. We're all going through this. But the purpose of it, the reason why it says in Hebrews that God does this is so that we can share in the holiness of God, and that process yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. And so I would look at that as, yeah, it's probably not a pleasant thing, but it's for a short time, and it's for a specific purpose that in the end is for our good. It's so that we can share in the holiness of God.
So would you say there's maybe an aspect of sort of threat even in the apostolic universalist viewpoint, or the early church's patristic universalist viewpoint?
That there's a what?
There's sort of an aspect of threat
No, I don't see it as a threat. I mean, to me, a threat would be do this or else this will happen. Where again, the universalist view is no matter what you do, you're going to go through this process. But the good news is that this process is for your good.
Yeah.
And it might not feel good at the time. Again, Hebrews says exactly that. No suffering feels good at the moment, but in the end, we're grateful for our loving parents or loving father who does discipline us because we recognize that it was for our good.
But there is maybe a promise of more suffering or pain for those who don't get their act together in this life. Is that correct?
I think it
not?
possibly is implied, but I don't know that it's automatic. I mean, it's probably implied in some way, yeah, that it's better to go through a sanctification process in this life, so that it goes better with you. I mean, so Paul uses that exact metaphor of that everyone will pass through the fire, and if he has good deeds, they'll be revealed again in this purifying fire metaphor as gold and silver and precious stones. So it's probably better for that guy or that woman, that person, because hey, there's something good there now. Hey, look, it revealed something good for Christ and for the kingdom. But he says, even if someone passes through the fire and there's nothing, it all burns up and completely, it's just poof, it's gone. You was nothing. It says, and still they will be saved, but only as those who pass through the fire. So again, I see that as the promise that, whatever the outcome is, it's still going to be in your good at the end. The grace of God prevails.
Yeah. So that's the primary distinction. The universalist view has a positive end in mind, which the other views don't necessarily for the lost.
That's right. So
there's still a promise of pain, maybe.
Yeah, the way I say it is that all three views involve this fire metaphor. The difference is what is the purpose and nature of the fire. So in eternal conscious torment, the purpose and nature of the fire is just to torture you for eternity. That's it. In annihilationism or conditional immortality, the purpose of the fire is to burn you up and destroy you if you're not righteous. And universalism, the purpose and nature of the fire is to reveal the image of Christ in you and restore you to some original innocence and goodness.
Gotcha. Sorry, Derek, I wasn't trying to take over. I was trying to clarify some definitions.
No, it's good. I think one of the things that helped me to be more sympathetic to the universalist view was because sometimes things just seem too easy or like soft, as you mentioned, Cody, about Augustine. But when I was reading George MacDonald, he has a piece, I think it was called The Consuming Fire.
Yes.
And so he basically says that, look, we have this difficulty figuring out, well, how can God not be in hell in the ECT view? How is there a hell and how is God not in hell with people? But MacDonald, he's like, look, heaven and hell are really the same place because everybody goes to be in the presence of God because
Right.
God is everywhere. He says it's just the people who are redeemed are going to experience God differently than the people who aren't. And so the way that I imagined it was, I was reading this like right around the time that the Thai soccer team was trapped in the cave for like 2 weeks. And I was thinking, man, when they come out and they're rescued and they come into the presence of the sun, like to all those people waiting outside, that sun is warm, it's beautiful, it's awesome. But to those Thai kids who are coming out, like that sun is going to be abrasive. They're not going to be able to look at it. It's going to, I don't know, maybe burn their skin. I don't know how you react after 2 weeks living in a cave,
Right.
but they're going to experience that sunlight different than the people who are rescuing them. Nevertheless, they're going to be thankful that they're being rescued, and that sun is a good thing. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
And so I think I don't currently hold a universalist position, but I really like MacDonald's rendition of that.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis, who was, of course, a friend of MacDonald's, that says essentially the same thing in his novel, The Great Divorce, right? That people, that for some people, the beautiful green grass are like sharp blades that are cutting their skin, but the other people are walking barefoot, and they, what's wrong with you? This is awesome. This is great, right? But they're both in the same presence of God. Just that some experience it in a different way.
I think Rob Bell said that was it the hell was being at the party, that people, it's like God's presence is a party that if you're happy to be there, you enjoy it. If you're not happy to be there, it's not very fun.
Right.
And I remember thinking, man, I'm never going to go to one of Rob Bell's parties. But hell is being at the party. All right, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so just one more quick question in regard to the history, and then we'll dig into the propaganda. So we all recognize that there seem to be a diversity of views. We can discuss, figure out to what extent we think each view was held, but it seemed like there was relative respect for the various views that we know exist on hell. But obviously, at some point in history, it seems like there was a shift where there became one dominant view. Do you all know anything about the history of how that occurred, or what influences kind of propelled ECT to the forefront and to exclusivity?
So I have a theory, because I don't think there's a specific sort of like, it's not like, well, when Constantine showed up at this point in time, then he decreed something, and boom, from this point on, we see the shift. That I know of, there's no like defining decisive, from this point forward, eternal conscious torment became the dominant view. But I think there's some clues in it, in history. So one of them is, and this goes to our subject about propaganda. In my book, Jesus Undefeated, I came across a kind of a disturbing realization. So this was a book by Brian Edward Daly called Hope of the Early Church. And in this book, he mentions first of all that Basil the Great, was an admirer of Origen in his younger days, but in his later years, he became, quote, more severe in his expectations of the future and found the teaching of judgment valuable for the spiritual development of Christians. And then he says, like Basil, John Chrysostom saw eschatological themes as a crucial part of his preaching ministry. Chrysostom explains the need for such eternal punishment in his 15th homily on 2 Timothy. And this is a quote. We have his sermons. So this is great. We can see what he preached on. And so in this sermon he preached, he says, quote, since the greater part of are virtuous from constraint rather than from choice, the principle of fear is of great advantage to them in eradicating their desires. Let us therefore listen to the threatenings of hell fire, that we may be benefited by the wholesome fear of it. So it seems that there were some church fathers who were very vocal, honest about the fact that they may or not personally necessarily believe in eternal conscious torment, but they saw it as something that was effective, right? Like, hey, it really works. It really motivates people using this fear, the way Chrysostom says, right? The benefits of fear. And if we preach this fear, then we get, in their view, in their mind, more committed Christians, because they're terrified. Raise your hand if you want to burn in hell forever. This is where it led to, and so that to me seems to be around the time I would see it started to go in that direction. That there were church fathers who saw it as a useful tool, and so again, this is probably maybe the beginning of the propaganda phase. The other thing is going back to what I read a minute ago from the encyclopedia about those 6 schools. So again, 4 of those schools were Universalists. They were located in Antioch, Alexandria, Caesarea, and Edessa. The Universalist school, so those are Universalists. The one that was in Ephesus taught conditional immortality or annihilation. And the one school that taught eternal conscious torment was located in Rome. And so we can see that over time in church history, yes, around the time or post Constantine, that as the more and more that Rome became the center of Christian power and thought. In other words, if you were in Rome and you were part of Christendom at the time, they had the power now of the state to sort of impose their views on the Christian world. And so I would say it's those 2 things. It's early Christians who saw it as advantageous to preach fear because they felt like there were benefits to preaching that fear, and eternal conscious torment fits the bill. But also, you start off with 6 schools teaching different things, and one of them is in Rome. I could see where over time those other schools kind of get shouted down and marginalized. And by the way, in the Orthodox, like the Eastern Orthodox Church, those teachings of universalism didn't fade away; they continued, right? And so that's another thing we can look at and see that there are Eastern Orthodox Christians who still firmly embrace Athanasius and Gregory of Nyssa and their views, and that's sort of the history that they lean back on of tradition of teaching this patristic universalism.
Yeah, I found David Bentley Hart's "That All Shall Be Saved" really, really insightful and helpful in avoiding caricatures of they're just soft and not intellectual.
Right.
Cody, anything to add?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if the pragmatic arguments necessarily prove that people were being disingenuous, because I think we still use those pragmatic arguments today. People who genuinely believe in ETC will ask me, well, how can you get people saved if you're not telling them God's going to torture them forever? So they still believe it, but they also rely on a pragmatic argument. And I always feel weird about kind of psychoanalyzing people and guessing kind of what people's motivations are, but it is interesting. Some people will sort of blame Constantine or Augustine, but clearly the ETC goes back before then. I think you could at least explain the rise of the 3 views by just reference to Scripture, because there are some passages that seem universalist, some passages that seem annihilationist, and some passages that seem like ETC. And the way I kind of look at it is that ETC is kind of like what you get when you literally translate a handful of proof texts. And so that the literal reading of a few proof texts that seem very strongly to suggest something often will impress upon the mind in a strong way. Whereas I think annihilationism kind of is almost like more of like a meta narrative. You kind of lean back and look at Scripture and you see this, what happens in the garden, and you have death and you have the promise of life. And so that kind of fits a little bit with this big picture. And then I think universalism is often more like reading between the lines. You kind of look at this, the grace that God has, and they sort of promise that, like, you read something like Jonah, where God never says, if you repent, I'll spare you. But somehow that's what happens anyway. What God actually says literally is not even really what he's going to do. God is even more gracious than he is, wrathful or whatever, right? So I think you can explain the rise of the 3 views with reference to Scripture. Why does one become more popular? I want to look more into the 6 schools thing, because I've heard that reference, but I've also I don't know how strongly that is rooted in history. But when you read somebody like I think Tertullian makes the argument that yes, of course, we have to be nonviolent, we have to love our enemies, but one day we'll be comforted by the fact that we'll be able to hear their screams in hell. And so there may be I'm hopefully not getting too Freudian here, but I think that there could be, at least for some people, certainly for Tertullian, this promise that, yes, I have to behave well now and not get vengeance on my enemies, but I can, one day I'm really going to enjoy hearing him burn. So that kind of desire for vengeance might factor in. And I think also Keith's correct that there's this desire to get converts, this desire to keep people on the straight and narrow, and this threat of eternal conscious torment seems like a strong motivator.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be a good point for us to kind of move into propaganda more specifically, because when we're talking about changes and shifts and that coming as a result of power, okay, there's more centralization, more power. I think that leads into kind of what we're discussing here, because Cody, before we started, you're like, I kind of need we need a working definition of propaganda to go with. And, you'd think that after I did as many episodes as I did, that it would be really easy to come up with a definition. And, as I was thinking about it and going back through the season, I was like, I don't know if I ever actually just set out a concise definition, because I do a whole lot of exploring what it is and how it works. But to kind of condense that into a simple definition is difficult. But Cody, you are really thorough and you're really good at kind of making things structured and work. So I like the definition that you came up with, and we can kind of go with that. And it plays off of what what Keith was just saying with in regard to power. So the working definition that we have here is an effort by those with power to manipulate public sentiment to conform to an approved view in order to bring about desired ends. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, that works for me. I think, and I think there was some discussion, which I'm sure we're going to get into in this conversation. I hope we do anyway in this conversation, because we had a sort of thread going. You guys mainly had a thread going before we jumped on the call, kind of trying to arrive at that definition, which I thought was very, very insightful and very helpful. But the difference too between, so that's a good definition of like sort of the origins of propaganda, right? But then there's also then a secondary consideration of once the propaganda has been created for that means and for that end by those people who want to maintain power and control, there are always people at sort of lower levels who may not even be aware of the propagandized nature of the statements that they are now, because they honestly believe them. They genuinely take this as fact and truth. And now then they're repeating it, right? And so those people become propagandists who may be oblivious to the propagandized nature of that information. And so they're continuing to perpetuate that. And I would argue you almost need those people for it to be effective, right? Because I think if everyone, if most of everyone knew, yeah, this is BS. We're just doing this. We're just saying this to maintain power. At some point, a few people are going to go, I don't feel good about this. This isn't great. You know what I mean? Like, I see people really full of fear, really suffering over this message. I know there's nothing to be afraid of, but I'm the one making them really, full of anxiety and fear. It wouldn't work. So you almost need, for it to work and be successful, you need that layer of people who do genuinely believe it and who do think that what they're doing and saying is true and therefore must be repeated and must be emphasized.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think it also needs to be said that people who disseminate propaganda, who create the propaganda rather, may also believe it to some extent. I think that they're probably being manipulative and a little bit, but they could still sort of say, yes, of course we need to invade Iraq, and here's the reason why. But they're still going to sort of engage in this kind of manipulative approach to try to getting people on their side. It's not entirely like, well, let's have an open, honest discussion about it and see what we think, right? Yeah. And so I think that is at least part of it too, that propaganda isn't necessarily a false statement, but it is, I think, something that's manipulative. So
I think that I see what you're saying. Again, I think to a point, but I also think that there might, so the person might really believe it, but there's also, I think, I don't know if this is this necessary, but it seems like with most propaganda, there is an element of, it's not that the propaganda itself is necessarily true as much as it's a means to an end. What they believe in is the result, like invading Iraq. So the people that made up that story, right, are the CIA and our government, right, our intelligence community, they believed it was a good thing if we invaded Iraq, because they believed they were bad actors, and so they needed to come up with reasons to convince the American public why this was justified. So they knew that the reasons were false. That was the propaganda, but they believed in the outcome. They believed in, but this needs to happen for whatever reason.
Well, so an example that comes to my mind immediately, because he was such an effective propagandist, is Hitler. So was Hitler a true believer or not? And I think it's, on one level, he probably was, but on the other level, there's this manipulation of reality that's taking place that, Hitler wasn't open to inquiry. He wasn't like, well, let's have a talk about it and see if these weird racial theories really hold up to scientific scrutiny. Right.
So there could be layers. I think I agree with you, Cody. There could be layers to it as well, because I think hopefully we don't get too far down, chasing rabbits here. But I remember watching maybe about a year or so ago, there was a pretty good documentary on PBS about Donald Trump. And it was talking about how early on in his presidency, he personally could care less about abortion. He didn't care about gay people getting married, and he had made statements to this effect even before he was president. Let him get married. He doesn't care. Right. But there were people around him that convinced him that, no, we needed to have a strong message in this direction because it's going to speak to our base and they're going to, get excited and vote for you. And so he was like, oh, okay. So there is still, I think there's certain parts, let's say, of a political campaign that somebody might be a true believer. They really do believe, like, immigrants are the worst thing ever, and they're going to take your job and impose Sharia law or whatever. So maybe that part of it they really do believe, but there's other parts of their statements and of their propaganda that they really don't believe, but they see it as like, well, hey, but my people believe it. People that follow me really want to hear me stand up and say these things, and if I do, I get more votes and my rallies get bigger and my points go up or whatever.
Well, like you said earlier, the ends justifying the means.
Right.
I think also that this element of power is kind of important, because to me, I think that sometimes we talk about people's motivations for believing in ETC that might not be entirely rooted in truth, right? And I think that people have motivations for believing in universalism too sometimes that aren't entirely rooted in truth or proper exegesis of scripture. It's something they want to believe, but I don't think that universalism can be wielded as a weapon in the same way that eternal conscious torment or even annihilation could, which I think could put it in, if it's incorrect, especially, it could put it in the category of disinformation or falsehood or something that's not stated, something that's not entirely believed for the right reasons, but it's still maybe not propaganda because no one really gains power over somebody else by saying that eventually everyone's going to be in heaven or something.
Yeah, but the internal, sorry, Derek.
No.
But if I was going to put on my eternal conscious torment hat, I would say, because if I really genuinely believed that God's plan was, if you don't pray the prayer, and if you're not a Christian, and you are going to burn in hell forever, then I would look at someone like me who is teaching universalism as a threat. I would see that this is evil, this is wrong. You are leading people astray. They are going to burn in hell forever, and you're not telling them the truth. And therefore, right, I think I could see someone with a universalist message, if I was eternal conscious torment believer, as a form of propaganda, in the sense that it's a false message, and that they would probably see it as, well, you're attracting followers to yourself. You're getting people to follow you and to believe your lie, buy your book or whatever. And so I think it can go both ways. I think you could, depending on your perspective and your assumptions.
So maybe that would be a good place to kind of zoom in. I don't know where you all want to go with it, but I think when people discuss propaganda, a lot of times they focus on the fear aspect, which is why I think ECT gets a lot of flack, because, well, you're just scaring people, which is clearly manipulative. And so perfect love casts out fear, and that's just propaganda when you're trying to scare people into the kingdom. And that's true. Like fear is a big component of a lot of propaganda. Government propaganda, abusers do the same thing with victims, all that kind of stuff. But when you get into the corporate propaganda, they don't scare so much, but their role is to incentivize in other ways, and so they shape your desires through their sorts of propaganda, and they
Yes.
they just bombard you with things that get you to desire certain things, and they kind of hold a carrot and stick out in front of you.
Yep.
Instead of having a stick behind you hitting you.
Right.
And I think people would view universalism as sort of that carrot and stick kind of thing. Like, well, we all want, that nice, fluffy heaven where I don't really have to worry about evangelizing. I don't have to worry about people going to hell and that nasty message. Whereas with ECT, it's the fear aspect. Yet both of those can be propagandistic. So maybe, and annihilation too, right? ECT and annihilation kind of go together because even though you're not suffering forever on annihilationism or conditional immortality,
yes.
Right? Ceasing to exist. And some forms, correct me if I'm wrong, Cody, but some forms would say that there is suffering until you cease to exist.
Yeah. There's a lot of views. Yeah. A lot of forms of that.
So maybe you could talk about that. So we've got two kind of methods for propaganda. You've got the incentivizing, and then you've got the through fear, and you've got incentivizing through desire. So maybe if you wanted to defend, I know you've been defending ECT here for a little bit. Maybe you want to defend your own views from those two.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say something similar about both. I mean, to me, that definition I gave was kind of meant to sort of include all the elements that I think are what we are sort of thinking about when we talk about propaganda. We're not just talking about misinformation. I think on some level, we're talking about a power play. And, there can be a power play in universalism, as Keith mentioned, somebody trying to grow a following, for example. But I don't think it lends itself to it as much, which is not to say, I mean, you have advertising that's kind of a power play, right? It's not like, it's buy this razor and you'll get the hot chicks. That's not it's not meant to, frighten somebody, but it is still a power play. It's a way to try to get people to give you something, to manipulate them. So yeah, universalism can work in that way. I think what I'd say about, I don't know that I'd say something unique about annihilation in this point, because I think, ETC is basically just in a similar boat as annihilation, but just more so, which is there is this threat, there is this danger, and is the fact that there's something to be afraid of, does that make it inherently a power play? And I would say no. I think, you imagine a preacher who's trying to get his flock to listen to him, to obey him. He might use hell. Somebody who is an abuser, somebody who's sexually abusing someone young, and we'll warn them with this threat. If you tell on me, God's going to get you, whatever.
Yeah.
You can imagine something like that, and that's like a pretty obvious power play. And you could also you can take out eternal conscious torment and slide in annihilation there. You can imagine the Seventh-day Adventist pastor also trying to get his flock to be on his side by threatening judgment of God in some other way, right? So I think just the real question is the motivation. Is it a power play or is it not a power play? Because if someone is saying, I think this is true, I'm telling you what I believe, and here's my arguments for it, and I'd be happy to hear yours. Somebody who's making that kind of a case for eternal conscious torment or annihilationism, I don't think is a propagandist in the sense that they are creating propaganda. So I don't know. I don't know if that gets us anywhere or not, but that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. Sorry, really quick analogy. I think about with my kids, if I tell them not to go in the street and they say why, and I say, well, because a car can hit you and that could hurt you or kill you. Yes, there's an element of fear involved there, but like there's a really big truth and reality that I'm exposing. And I guess you'd say intent goes a long way in regard to whether something's propaganda or not.
Yeah, okay. I think so. As Cody was talking, I was trying to think. So I have the experience that, I used to believe for most of my life, I believed and taught eternal conscious torment. For probably about a year and a half, I was annihilationist. And I was convinced, this is it. This makes sense. And then I became someone who embraced patristic universalism. And that's where I've landed now. But because of that, I have taught and preached all three views. And so I was thinking, as Cody was talking, was I spreading propaganda when I believed eternal conscious torment? Not knowingly, because I believed it, right? I wouldn't look back and say those things that I said was because again, we're making a distinction between someone who knows it's not true, but I see value in it, so I'm going to say it anyway. Certainly I saw there was a value, because when I did altar calls after preaching a sermon that included, some sort of allusion to eternal torment, hey, I got more people to come forward than what if I said it doesn't matter either way. So when I preached all three of those things, or I believed all three of those things, I wouldn't have thought I was creating propaganda, because at the time I believed it when I said it. But at the same time, though, it doesn't change the fact that when I taught, especially eternal conscious torment, I was unintentionally a propagandist. I was sharing things I thought was true, but things that I frankly had not really investigated for myself. I had not really looked to see very closely, what do I base these views on? I never did. I never ever went and examined the eternal conscious torment view. Like, okay, what are the scriptures that teach this? And what does it really say? And does it really say this? And how does that map to other scriptures? Like, I never did that until someone suggested to me that there were other views that were equally, biblical. And it was only then that I was willing to go and do that kind of scrutiny. And then when I did, I was like, oh, yeah, that these verses don't teach eternal conscious torment. In fact, it's never mentioned anywhere in the Old Testament at all. And the references that supposedly say this in the New Testament are Jesus quoting Old Testament prophets, who again weren't talking about where anybody went after they died. But I never saw that until I was able to step away from it a little bit.
It's hard to. Oh, sorry.
That goes to the question I think Cody raised when we were discussing in Messenger, which is, but if you say that you were a propagandist at that point, or you were propagandizing, then not out of intent, but just because you were not informed correctly, you believed the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Does that just mean like any false belief makes you a propagandist for that thing? Or is there something that distinguishes propaganda from just false belief?
See, to me, this is hard to split a hair on, because if there is a false belief, it's a belief that is not based in fact, and it's not true. And people are teaching it because they just don't know it isn't true. I mean, I don't see how that's any different than any other truth, or any other statement that isn't true, or belief that isn't true, whether it's political or theological or marketing message. You know what I mean? Like, drink this and your hair will grow back. Like, you could really believe it, but if it really doesn't work, well, then it's not true. And you're sharing something that maybe you believe it's true, but it just isn't, right? And so there's no other way to look at it. The way I can see it is that you are repeating something that you believe to be true, but it is not true. Then, like it or not, you are participating in the propagandizing, of that statement or of that belief, or of that product, or whatever it happens to be.
But Keith, maybe the distinction I think is whether it's a power play or not, because I don't think that when you were preaching eternal conscious torment or annihilationism, at that point I was trying to manipulate my congregation and try to get power over them. But once I became universalist, then I wasn't doing that anymore. And I think to me that's the difference between something that's propagandist and that's not. Because I've said and thought false things before. I've made false statements about, I think that's that actor in this who's also in this other movie, right? I mean, I wasn't a propagandist because I said something that was incorrect. But if somehow I could use that to try to get power over somebody, then maybe that would be different, right? So
let me just respond to that, because it's a good point. But I would say that even though when I believed eternal conscious torment and I was preaching that, and no, I wouldn't say, I could go in a time machine and interview myself. I wouldn't say, oh, I'm doing this so I can have power over people. But it doesn't change the fact that I did have power over people. That fear message did give me power over them. And again, that wasn't my motivation, but it's just still true that because I preached that, the fear factor involved in that message did give me a certain influence of power over those people that if I preached something different, I wouldn't have the power over them, right?
But did you benefit from, because that's something I've had, I know pastors, I've had pastors who believed in ETC and annihilationism, and I didn't I wasn't under the ETC pastors' thumbs more than I was the annihilationist pastors. And so I think, saying something from a position of power that's incorrect is different than using your power to try to get something from somebody.
So I would say, if you phrase it the way you just did about like, did I get something from it? Did I personally benefit? Well, maybe not. Maybe you could argue, well, those people stayed in my church and they continued to tithe, and therefore I kept making money every month. But I don't think I don't think I necessarily have to like benefit specifically from it as much as I was still manipulating those people to behave a certain way and to agree with what I believed. And so the outcome was that by preaching that fear, it kept people sort of in the group, you know what I mean? Part of the club that agrees with this idea. So it doesn't necessarily, I would say, have to be that, oh, I have to benefit in some way financially or in some other way for it to be propaganda. I think the benefits of the teaching or this or the idea or propagating the idea can be nuanced. It can have other, there are other outcomes that still in the long run are better for me.
Maybe there could be a side analogy here. It kind of makes me think of the Southern Baptist Convention, Rachel Den Hollander, and the sexual abuse and all the stuff that was kind of coming out there, and then they get them on a hot mic that said where they said, well, we have to appease the base, basically, where they're like, well, we don't want this stuff to come out. And so okay, the top leaders are covering up information, not releasing things. They're propagandists, right? There's your Cody, your intent and power and all of that stuff. But if I'm a Southern Baptist missionary who benefits from the Southern Baptist Church being in good standing and having members, or even if I'm a member and I'm a longtime Southern Baptist congregant, I don't want to believe that there's abuse going on. And I will swallow what they tell me, what the leaders tell me, and I will defend them and I will do all of these other things. And so even though I'm not in power and I'm not, I am not doing that necessarily to directly benefit, like I don't get money from that per se. Nevertheless, there is benefit to it. And you could extend this into, patriotism and
Yes.
the idea of American benevolence. And it's good for me to believe that our wars are good.
Yeah.
Even though the government is the intentional propagandist,
Sure.
I benefit from lower oil prices, from,
Yeah.
all of these other things, from having the solidarity of other people who are patriots like me. So I think that's what, in our discussion again on Facebook, that's what is difficult, I think, for me. And it sounds like Keith a little bit here, is that it really does seem hard to distinguish when something's propaganda versus just false belief. But your example of the, getting an actor wrong, like it clearly seems like there's some line somewhere.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say, Derek. Thank you. I think you did a good job of explaining that, much better than I did. Yeah, because like I may not personally benefit, but if you kind of trace the source of the propaganda up like you did to the top levels, I'm part of that organization, right? In some way, identify myself in some way, whether that's Southern Baptist or the Republican Party or whatever it happens to be, right? I identify myself with them. And so by participating in the propaganda, I'm protecting my own identity in some level too. I sleep better at night if I believe that we're the good guys and we're doing the right things for the right reasons. And so my continuing to perpetuate the propaganda that comes down to me from those people, maybe it doesn't benefit me in some tangible way, but it does benefit in that it maintains the power structure of the organization that's perpetuating the propaganda for that reason, to increase their reach, to increase their stability, to make it so that they continue to remain and have power and influence.
Well, and this is something we're kind of touching on, but Derek had mentioned a little bit more in the chat, which is the idea of the dupe who participates in his own propagandizing, right? Because there's something that he gets from it. And yeah, it's probably, I mean, more often than not, just the belonging to the group, having somebody to sort of to hate, or I think there's oftentimes in propaganda the idea of an enemy. I think that's pretty common.
Yes.
So yeah, you know, which I think is kind of a bigger question, which is, you know, what are our motivations for believing things? And you know, the older I get, the more I learn that, generally speaking, our motivation for believing things is not, well, it's true. You know, there's some other motivation that sort of gets us there, and then we sort of go back around the back way, and you say, okay, well, here's my arguments for it. Now that I believe it, I'll give you my arguments for it.
Right.
And so, you know, there's, in that sense, you know, if humans were, you know, capable of thinking more critically, propaganda would not be quite so powerful, because we'd ask those questions at the front end and not the back end.
That's right. No, that's a really great point too, Cody, because most of us don't believe, even if we believe correctly, most of us don't believe what we believe because we first examined all possible. We did a massive amounts of research, and we looked at everything from every angle. We listened to all the different voices, and only then we made up our minds, right? So, and we sometimes like to think that that's true. We like to convince ourselves subconsciously that, oh, well, I've examined all the other views. Well, not really, not objectively.
Yeah.
Usually we change our minds for different reasons. And then, like you said, we go back, because in fact, that's exactly what I just said I did, right? I believed eternal conscious torment. Then somebody gave me some information I didn't have before. That made me go back, and now I'm rethinking. Now I'm investigating, right? Now I'm willing to go back and look and see, oh, whoa, maybe I'm wrong about this. And then I changed my mind, right? It became annihilationist. And that lasted for a year and a half. And I thought, oh, now I'm right. But then then something else happened, and someone showed me something else. And I'm like, oh, what? And then I go and examine my annihilationism. And then I'm like, oh, okay. But most of us will either do a quick Google search and we're done. Oh, there you go. I got the answer. Okay, now I know what to believe. You know, I mean, even when I was a Christian, when I did apologetics and stuff in college, you know, I would even tell myself that, oh, I've looked at all the other religions, but the truth was, I was a Christian because I was born and raised in a nation of Christianity, right, where my choices were Baptist or Methodist or Episcopal or Lutheran. You know what I mean? I never once read any Vedas or any of the teachings of Buddha. I didn't attend, you know, a Jewish temple or anything like that, or a synagogue. So, you know what I mean? Like, I would tell myself, oh, I have investigated these other beliefs, but not truly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's even that level too of recognizing that even the way we change our minds about things is not always, if we're honest, isn't always based completely and only on objective study.
Well, to cut ourselves a little bit of slack, I mean, there are certain areas where I feel equipped to do deep research, and a lot of areas where I don't. And I think a lot of times social, you know, just sort of going along with what everybody else says is a shortcut for a couple reasons. One, because we're finite and we can't, you know, investigate every question to its fullness. You know, at some point we have to take some shortcuts, and it's beneficial for us to take the shortcuts. To take the shortcut of just sort of believing what everybody else around us believes, because then at least we fit in. And so, yeah, the only time it really hurts us is when, you know, when reality sort of comes smack against us in the face. So yeah, it's, I mean, I think about that a lot. I have a tendency to try to sort of like say, well, if I don't know, I'm going to just sort of try to say I'm agnostic. Well, I kind of think this, but maybe this, but I'm not really sure. That's a practice I've tried to sort of inculcate.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the more I think about it, I mean, the more I try to research things, the more I don't know. And I don't have time. I don't have time to research every question, even these minute questions about like my political beliefs or my religious beliefs. There's a certain point I go, that one's not that important to me. So I'm kind of, you know, I'll just sort of have some tentative views, but I'll say I don't really know for sure. But I think that those shortcuts that we take, that we have to take, are the reason why propaganda, I think, is partly so effective.
Yeah. I would agree. I guess what I would say is the person who is creating the propaganda is aware of that is how most people behave, and so they kind of depend on that, right? They take advantage of that.
Yeah, this reminds me a little bit. If you guys haven't read any of Drew Johnson's work on epistemology, it's this conversation is making it click a lot more for me, because he talks about how Western rationalism, a lot of times we think that we're very deductive and we come to logical conclusions, but how so much is really based in authority and like where we place our trust in authority. And yeah, I think that would be a great resource for you guys if you're really interested in pursuing that, like
that
how we
sounds
know those
interesting,
things.
Yeah, I think it's true. Like a lot of what we believe is inherited or borrowed, or like you said, it's just easier to go with Pastor Bob. He's been to seminary. He's telling me he knows the answer. Well, I'll trust him. He knows more than I do, right?
So I told you guys that I would try to keep it around an hour. So I've got one more question, whittled it down, and things are a bit different when you have two people instead of one. But I like it. I like the discussion, the back and forth. It's great. So last question to kind of bring us back to hell. And one of the questions that I had is, obviously we're talking about this because hell is often used in our culture as part of the gospel message. You mentioned, Keith, using it for altar calls, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a core aspect of the gospel for a lot of people, because when Jesus saves you, well, what is he saving you from? He's saving you from the wrath of God, is how it's viewed in our culture by and large. So, but yeah, I tried to think back through the Gospels, back through Acts and everything, and Peter's gospel message to the 5,000 and all these other things. And I mean, I might be missing something, but I did not see hell as a prime component in the gospel message. And in fact, like when you're reading through Mark, especially, but all of the gospels, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. The kingdom of God is at hand. Like it's all about the kingdom, the kingdom.
Yes.
I have brought the kingdom is coming. And Jesus tells you how to live that kingdom. So his salvation is the kingdom. Would you talk a little bit about hell as in the gospels and in maybe the early church, but hell as a component of the gospel? Is it something that should even be, or is the kingdom the gospel, and how is that different?
Yeah, well, I would agree with you, Derek. I kind of came to a similar realization much later in my Christian life, sadly. The recognition that the gospel that Jesus preached didn't include any sort of a shotgun wedding. Raise your hand if you don't want to burn in hell forever. I see that hand. Pray this prayer. Okay, you get out of hell. He doesn't present the gospel that way. Like you said, the good news, the gospel is the kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is at hand or near, close enough to touch. You can experience the kingdom reality right now, not after you're, you don't have to wait till after you're dead. So that's that aspect of it. And then, like you said, when you go to the book of Acts, when you see the sermons that are preached, something like 7 or 8 sermons preached in the book of Acts, none of them involve, again, the shotgun wedding, that you believe this or else you're going to suffer eternal torment. I mean, to me, again, one of the most shocking things about it too is like when Paul is in Rome and he's speaking to idol worshiping pagans, and his message to them is that there is a God that they don't know, that loves them, that is their father, and they are his children, and that this God loves them and blesses them and hopes that they would turn and know this God, and that this God is the one in whom they all live and move and have their being. Wow, that is, where's the judgment? Where's the fear? Where's the repent or else? You know what I mean? That's amazing. You know what I mean? So yeah, you don't really see these hell messages incorporated in preaching of the gospel. And Paul, and he preaches the same gospel of the kingdom. There's like 8 different references where Paul says he preached the good news of the kingdom. So he's preaching the same thing Jesus is preaching. So yeah, for me, I that's the way I see it. I don't believe, I think that the hell message, the threat of hell, as we've kind of talked about, I think it crept in, in later centuries. It was seen as something by many, like John Chrysostom and Basil the Great and some others, who felt like, hey, this really works. This is, if we use this fear, there's a benefit of fear. It gets people more motivated. It gets them to do what we want them to do, to behave the way we want them to behave. So I feel like that's the way this has kind of crept in, and it's become now the gospel message, but it's not the original gospel message. It's not the way the gospel is communicated by Jesus or by Paul or Peter or any of the other apostles. So personally, I don't think there should be, we shouldn't be preaching this as part of the gospel. The gospel is good news. It's this idea, like Paul says, that God was in Christ, not counting our sins against us, and he's reconciled the world to himself. That's great news. So I personally would rather see those kinds of things, like when the next time the guy takes the megaphone and the big signs and goes out to preach in the parking lot to people trying to go see a sports game or a concert or something, if they would just get their sermon from Paul in the book of Acts about when he says to the idol worshiping pagans, that would be refreshing. That'd be really great.
But when they say repent and believe and you will be saved, I guess what would you say they're being saved from?
Oh, no, that's a great question. That again, Cody probably disagrees with me, but
I was gonna say you have to buy Keith's book for the answer to that.
Thank you. Yes, please buy my book. Jesus Unforsaken deals with that probably more specifically because that's about penal substitution and answers that question about why did Jesus have to die and what's going on with that. Jesus Undefeated probably talks about it too. But I guess the short podcast version of that answer for me would be, when I go and look at the places where Jesus talks about being saved, or where people even ask the question, what must we do to be saved? That's a good question. Saved from what? So I look at it this way. This is what I believe. That Jesus showed up at a time in history when his people, the Jewish people, were looking for a Messiah, a violent Messiah who's going to lead an insurrection, storm the Capitol, kill Caesar, overthrow the Roman army, and establish the kingdom of God in a political sense, a Jewish kingdom, the throne of David, once again in Jerusalem. That's what they were expecting. That's the Messiah they were looking for. Jesus wasn't that kind of Messiah. So he said, yes, I'm here to quote unquote save you, but I believe, and this is why we misunderstand what Jesus is saying, what he's talking about when he uses this apocalyptic hyperbole, when he talks about with the destruction that's coming, the stars fall from the sky and the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched and the smoke of the torment rises forever and ever. He's quoting Old Testament prophets when they were prophesying against Babylon or Edom or Egypt or even Jerusalem. In different cases, because those Old Testament prophets say the exact same things. They use the exact same phrases. So when Jesus is using those same phrases to his people in Jerusalem, I believe what he's saying to them is, I am showing you another way. Isaiah says that when the Messiah shows up, he will show us his path, and those who follow his path will decide to study war no more and to beat their swords into plowshares. And that's what the Messiah who showed up, that was Jesus, that's what he preached. And so what he was saying was, guys, look, I can see you are all determined. You are on this path of violence. You want to overthrow the Roman government. And he's saying that path leads to destruction. Listen to my teaching. Listen to what I'm saying to you, right? The Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Go the extra mile. All those teachings are for his people in that time in history. That he's saying to them, if you will follow not the path you're on, that path is going to lead you off the cliff into absolute annihilation and destruction and what is called the end of the Jewish age, the end of the age. And by the way, that is where it led. The majority of them did not follow his message of peace, of enemy love. That was what I believe he was hoping that, if they would listen to him, that they could have avoided that fate, what happened in AD 70. But those are the warnings. That's what he's warning about. Not what's going to happen after they're dead, but a very real destruction, the same that came on Babylon and Edom and Egypt and Jerusalem in the Old Testament. Same language, same warnings, but now spoken to Jerusalem and saying to them, if you keep going in this path, it's going to lead to the destruction of the temple, the destruction of the priesthood, the end of the daily sacrifice, and that stuff, once it's over, it's game over. So don't go that direction. Follow what I'm teaching you, and you can avoid this. This is being saved. You can avoid that destruction. A very practical, real world destruction. I'm convinced that most of the time that's the kind of saving. That's what Jesus is talking about. That's what he's trying to save his people at that time from that outcome. So I see it much more practical and not so spiritual necessarily.
Yeah, I agree with Keith that Jesus was preaching annihilation. No, yeah, it's probably time for me to plug one of my books. I wrote a short essay. It's on Kindle. It's like a buck or something. The Gospel of the Resurrection. And so my perspective is, I like what Scott McKnight said, that the gospel is the story of Israel resolved in the story of Jesus, which is why I think we can't disconnect the OT from the New Testament. To me, as I read, what the apostolic preaching, Jesus's resurrection is integral to the gospel message because of what the Old Testament tells us about sin leading to death. As Paul says, Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death, the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus. And so that the resurrection is important because it's a proclamation that death is not the end, at least for some, for those who are in Christ. I mean, you could call that preaching hell. I mean, there is a warning about the wages of about sin paying death. I know that some folks like Greg Boyd kind of want to minimize the fact that God is sort of an active agent in the punishing, which I think the Bible does say in a number of places. But whether you see God as sort of more passively letting us go that way or more actively pushing it, there is, I think, a bad news part of this, which is that the wages of sin is death, and the good news part of it is that the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus.
All right. There was a lot of stuff that we just didn't get to, and most of it we kind of talked about in a roundabout way instead of addressing directly. Is there anything that I missed that you were like, I really wanted to say something about that or get into that?
Feel pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I feel good about it. This was good. I enjoyed it.
Okay. All right. Well, then thank you very much for doing this and taking time out of your day. Is there anything else that you all would like to plug?
I think I'm good. I mentioned, I do write books. Keith mentioned that he's written some books as well. His Jesus Un series, which all start with Jesus Un something. And I've got some, books on some different topics, but I've been writing a little bit more on kind of Christian anarchism type stuff in more recent years. But yeah, if you put a link to my website or whatever, people will be able to find my stuff there.
Yeah, I would say, if you're curious about my crazy ideas and the things I talk and write about, I blog on Patheos. You can find it just by going to keithgiles.com, and it'll redirect you to my blog. In addition to my books, which are on Amazon, I have a book called Sola Mysterium, Celebrating the Beautiful Uncertainty of Everything, and a follow-up book coming up later this year to that series. And I also teach some online courses on topics like this. Again, topics that are connected to my book. So like I have a course on hell, Jesus Undefeated. I have a course on the cross, Jesus Unforsaken, talks about penal substitution and all that. Second coming, the end times, and all that stuff. So you can find information about that if you just go to my blog, keithgiles.com, or you can just message me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. You can find me there too.
You guys are busy, and that makes me especially honored that you would take time to have a discussion with me. So thank you all so much.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you, Derek. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Cody.
That's all for now. So peace. And because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.